Marlene Warren. On the morning of May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren opened the door of her Wellington, Florida home to a bizarre sight. A cheerful figure stood on her porch holding carnations and balloons, wearing a complete clown costume. "How nice," Marlene remarked to her son, Joe Aarons. Seconds later, the clown raised a gun and shot Marlene in the face, then calmly walked back to a white Chrysler Leron and drove off. Marlene was married to Michael Warren, the wealthy owner of Bargain Motors. Their marriage had been deeply strained. Before she was shot, Marlene warned her son that if anything happened to her, his father would be responsible. A chilling premonition that would haunt detectives for decades as the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate manhunt. Investigators quickly learned that Michael Warren was having an affair with Sheila Keane, an employee at his dealership. Witnesses soon came forward, reporting they had seen Sheila buying clown outfits and balloons at local stores days before the murder. Police tracked that white Chrysler Leron to a rental car linked directly to Michael's business. Inside the abandoned car, forensic techs discovered orange wig fibers and strands of brown hair, but the DNA technology of 1990 was not advanced enough to build a profile. Despite strong circumstantial evidence, the case soon went cold. Michael and Sheila married in 2002, moving to Tennessee to run a restaurant. It seemed they had escaped justice forever, leaving Marlene's family desperate for answers. The breakthrough came in 2017, when advanced DNA testing allowed scientists to re-examine that hair. The testing revealed a match to Sheila Keane Warren, giving detectives the solid physical proof they needed. Florida detectives quickly arrested Sheila right at her Tennessee restaurant. Throughout the legal proceedings, Sheila fiercely maintained her innocence. The prosecutor outlined a clear motive, arguing that romantic rivalry drove the elaborate disguise and execution. But with decades having passed, concerns over the case, strength forced a plea deal. In 2023, Sheila pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving a 12-year sentence. Her attorney, Greg Rosenfeld, stood by her, stating publicly, "As we've stated from the beginning, she did not commit this crime." Sheila Keane Warren was released in 2024, serving only about 18 months. Marlene's son, Joe, remained convinced that both Sheila and his father were responsible. Although Michael was never charged, this remains one of the most bizarre murder cases in Florida history. The 33-year gap to conviction highlights tireless detective work and the incredible power of modern forensics. While that murder required complex planning, another Florida case would expose a shocking betrayal. Linda Slatten. In the early hours of September 4th, 1981, 31-year-old Linda Slatten was found dead inside her Lakeland, Florida apartment. The killer had slipped in through a window, leaving a palm print behind. It was Linda's sister, Judy Butler, who stumbled upon the horror. Judy later recalled the discovery. She was lying crossways instead of straight on the bed. At first, I thought maybe she was just asleep. And then, I just started screaming. Officers processed the apartment meticulously, gathering biological evidence and capturing that single palm print. The medical examiner soon confirmed that Linda had been strangled with a wire coat hanger. What made it even more horrific was that Linda's young sons were asleep in the small apartment during the attack. The investigation stalled, dragging on over the years. In 1999, scientists successfully extracted a DNA profile from evidence left at the scene. They loaded the profile into the database, but found no match. The real breakthrough came through genetic genealogy. In 2019, genealogist C.C. Moore uploaded the profile to GED Match. The search flagged distant relatives, helping detectives construct family trees. The genetic genealogy research pointed to a chilling possibility. It pointed directly to 20-year-old Joseph Clinton Mills. This truth devastated Linda's sons. Mills had been Tim's youth football coach, remaining a constant presence in the boys' lives even after their mother's tragic death. To confirm their suspicions, detectives secretly secured a discarded piece of tape Mills had touched. The DNA matched the crime scene profile perfectly, giving investigators the evidence needed for an arrest. They also matched a palm print on Linda's window to one taken from Mills back in 1984. When confronted, Mills offered an excuse that investigators simply didn't buy. He claimed a consensual encounter had simply gone wrong. Detective Russell Hurley shut that down, telling Mills, "You purposely killed her. We're all sitting here." In fact, Mills had dropped the young boy at home just hours before the attack. Genealogist C.C. Moore later admitted, This case made me angrier than almost any other because of what he did while those kids were right there. In 2022, Joseph Clinton Mills pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, receiving life without parole. At the sentencing, Jeff Slatten confronted Mills directly, asking the question that had haunted him for decades. Why? That is what I want to know. Why? She was a good person. Why would you do that? Tim Slatten told reporters, I trusted this man. He was the absolute last person I ever thought would do this. Today, Joseph Clinton Mills remains locked up in Florida. But across the country, another cold case would reveal how nature itself could preserve vital evidence. It begins with Bobby Joe Oberholtzer. On January 6, 1982, a massive blizzard struck Summit County, Colorado. 29-year-old Bobby Joe Oberholtzer and 22-year-old Annette Schnee were hitchhiking separately in the raging storm. Both women vanished into the freezing night, taken by a killer whose identity would remain a secret for nearly 40 years. Bobby Joe was found first. The very next morning, rescuers discovered her frozen body on Hoosier Pass. Investigators found a zip tie around her wrist, and strangely, a single orange sock lying nearby. But that orange sock did not belong to her. Annette Schnee remained missing until July 1982, when her body was discovered in Sacramento Creek. Incredibly, Annette was wearing a matching orange sock to the one found near Bobby Joe. Prosecutor Stephanie Miller later explained, the orange sock is key because when Annette left that vehicle, she did not put on just one sock. Those matching socks definitively tied the two homicides together. Yet, the early investigation hit roadblock after roadblock. Detectives interviewed dozens of motorists who were out in the storm, but one specific conversation stood out. They spoke with Alan Lee Phillips, a man rescued from a deep snowdrift the very night both women vanished. Phillips had been trapped in his snowbound truck, sporting a nasty gash on his forehead when help arrived. He claimed he simply got lost. Though police noted his head wound, they had zero reason to link him to the crimes. The double murder went cold for decades. In 2020, investigators used DNA from a bloody glove found near Bobby Joe to run a genetic genealogy search after standard databases failed. They uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to public genealogy websites. The family tree research quickly pointed a finger directly at Alan Lee Phillips. Detectives shadowed Phillips, grabbed a discarded item, and confirmed his DNA matched the blood on that glove. They soon discovered his criminal record dating back to 1973, making that old forehead gash highly suspicious. Detectives believed it was a battle wound from one of the victims fighting back. When Phillips was finally arrested in 2021, Park County Sheriff Tom McGraw announced, I am honored to make this major announcement nearly 40 years after these brutal murders took place. The 2022 trial ended with Phillips being convicted on 2 counts of murder and kidnapping, resulting in 2 consecutive life sentences. But in 2023, at age 72, Alan Lee Phillips took his own life while behind bars. The mystery stood out, not just because the killer was rescued from the very storm he used to hunt, and how a simple orange sock became the crucial link holding 2 separate victims' fates together. Sometimes, as we will see, the truth hides within the family itself. Fawn Cox. On the morning of July 26, 1989, a Kansas City family woke up to a parent's worst nightmare. Their 16-year-old daughter was gone. An intruder had slipped through her bedroom window, creeping silently through the dark. When her mother tried to wake her, she made the agonizing discovery that Fawn was already gone. Local police swept the bedroom, gathering crucial DNA evidence and mapping exactly how the killer got inside. An autopsy confirmed she had been assaulted and strangled, but the killer had left precious genetic trace behind. This highly personal attack, and the chilling reality that the killer targeted her in her own bed, pointed to someone who knew the house well. Detectives questioned relatives, friends, and neighbors, searching for any connection to the young girl. But her circle offered no clear leads. Their only real hope lay in the genetic evidence left behind. The case dragged on through the 90s and into the new millennium. As forensic science advanced, technicians finally extracted a complete DNA profile from the preserved evidence. They ran it through the national database, but got 0 matches. Decades rolled by, leaving the family to carry the crushing weight of silence. Fawn's sister, Felisa, refused to let her memory fade, constantly pushing detectives for any new updates. In 2020, genetic genealogy changed everything. Detectives teamed up with experts to upload the killer's DNA profile to public ancestry databases. The search flagged distant relatives, giving investigators the clues to build out a massive family tree. That family tree led straight to a horrifying realization. The genetic trail pointed directly to Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's own cousin. He was 21 when she died. His close family ties meant he knew the home's layout inside and out. Knowing that her killer was a relative only deepened the family's profound heartbreak. But justice would remain out of reach. Donald had died of an overdose in 2006, 14 years earlier. There would be no handcuffs, no courtroom trial, and no chance for her family to demand answers. When the Kansas City police closed the case in 2020, investigators felt a bittersweet relief. This tragedy hit everyone hard. An innocent girl had been stolen from the safety of her own bed. Felisa Cox later shared the complicated emotions of that long-awaited day. She explained that while they finally had answers, the truth was far from what they had hoped to hear. It showed both the incredible power and the frustrating limits of genetic genealogy. The science could unmask a killer after 30 long years, but it could never force him to face a judge. Fawn's family finally had answers, even if they came poisoned by betrayal. Now, let's explore how another cold case was shattered by the tiniest speck of genetic evidence. Crystal Bezlanovich. In December of 1995, the body of 17-year-old Crystal was found abandoned along the Provo River in Wasatch County. The killer had beaten her with heavy granite stones from the riverbank, leaving her body in the freezing currents. Crystal was surviving on the streets, a hard life that often forced her into the path of dangerous people. The local sheriff's department combed the riverbank, recovering the stained rocks and taking detailed photographs of the scene. Just feet from her body, they found a freshly discarded cigarette butt. Back in 1995, DNA testing existed, but it was light years behind what was coming. Detectives tried desperately to retrace her final hours and pinpoint who she was last seen with. But her associates lived mostly on the fringes of society, making them incredibly difficult to track down. A few suspects emerged, but without concrete physical proof, police had nothing to hold them on. The trail went cold for years, until a massive leap forward in forensic science reopened the case. In 2013, scientists used a vacuum-assisted extraction method on the river rocks. This method, known as touch DNA analysis, could pull genetic material from tiny skin cells left behind on handled objects. The tests successfully pulled a genetic profile from the rocks, which investigators immediately ran through national criminal databases. The profile matched Joseph Michael Simpson, a convicted killer who had recently been released back onto the streets on parole. Digging deeper, detectives discovered Simpson worked as a shuttle driver right where vulnerable women worked the streets. To confirm the match, they retrieved the cigarette butt collected 18 years earlier and tested it using advanced modern technology. The results matched Simpson perfectly, giving prosecutors a second rock-solid piece of evidence. At his 2016 trial, prosecutors laid out the DNA evidence alongside his violent past and his presence near the scene. The defense fought back, arguing that touch DNA is unreliable and could easily be transferred by innocent contact. Still, finding his DNA on both the murder weapon and the discarded cigarette was simply too damning. Wasatch County Sheriff Todd Bonner spoke of the case with deep, visible emotion. "It haunted me my entire career," he said. "It does not matter what she did. She was 17, a human being. I do not care what she did." Meanwhile, Crystal's stepfather, Jeff Bezlanovich, watched from the gallery. Once Simpson received life in prison, Jeff told reporters, "I'm just glad they finally got him. It took a very long time, but this man deserves to rot in a cell forever." Joseph Michael Simpson remains locked up in Utah, serving his life sentence. It became a landmark case for touch DNA, showing what science could do. But let us look at another case, where a killer tried to inject himself into the hunt. Anna Kaine. On October 23, 1988, 26-year-old Anna Kaine was found dead near Reading, Pennsylvania. She had been brutally beaten and strangled, with tight baling twine wrapped around her neck. Anna had lived a difficult life, but those close to her knew she was fighting hard to turn things around. Detectives in Berks County gathered crucial DNA evidence from her body and clothes, saving a genetic profile that would wait in databases for decades. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew her, trying to map out her final hours, but useful leads were incredibly hard to find. Then, in 1990, a bizarre twist occurred. The Reading Eagle newspaper received a chilling letter from someone who claimed to know how she died. The writers shared secret details of the crime never released to the public, proving they either watched the murder happen or committed it themselves. Detectives immediately knew how crucial this letter could be. The sender had sealed the envelope and licked the postage stamp, likely leaving trace saliva that carried their DNA. Police carefully preserved the evidence, waiting for technology to catch up. Decades passed with zero answers. The victim's DNA profile sat silently in databases for years without generating a single match, and that mysterious letter just sat waiting for the right breakthrough. That breakthrough finally came in 2022 through a partnership with Parabon Nanolabs. Scientists extracted old saliva DNA from the stamp and envelope, then uploaded the profile to public genealogy websites. It was a perfect match to the DNA on her clothes, proving the letter writer was indeed the killer. This advanced family tree research pointed directly to a local man named Scott Grimm from the Hamburg area. Looking back, detectives found Grimm had been arrested in 2002 for sending threatening letters to people. State Police Trooper Daniel Wummer explained the sheer significance of it. He noted, whoever wrote that letter to the newspaper was actively admitting they committed the murder. The letter was meant to mock police, but it became his own confession. But justice faced a final roadblock. Scott Grimm had already died of natural causes in 2018, 4 years before police finally unmasked him. There would be no arrest, no trial, and no chance for her family to face him. Anna's daughter was only a toddler when her mother was taken. Growing up alone shaped her entire life, and she recently shared her grief. I was just happy to finally see his face. She was gone, taken by a monster who would never live to face the consequences of his actions. No child should grow up without a mother. District Attorney John Adams admitted the deep community frustration. He acknowledged that since the killer was already dead, true justice would remain out of reach. Still, they finally solved the case, bringing long-awaited closure to the family. If you are hooked on these deep dives into true crime, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon. While other killers continued to escape justice, forensic technology was quietly and rapidly evolving. Karen Stitt. On the evening of September 3rd, 1982, 15-year-old Karen left her boyfriend's house in Sunnyvale, California, walking toward a bus stop that would take her back to her own home. But she never made it. The next morning, investigators found Karen's body hidden behind a wall, her wrists tied with her own shirt. She had been brutally attacked and stabbed 59 times in what detectives called a frenzied assault. The crime scene suggested that the killer had intentionally hidden her body to delay anyone finding her. The Sunnyvale police immediately launched an intensive murder investigation. Detectives carefully retraced her final steps, questioning her boyfriend, family, and anyone who saw her on September 3rd. Crucially, the bus stop she was heading toward was in a busy, populated area. Still, not a single witness came forward who saw her get approached or forced into a car. The case sat cold until 2022, when breakthroughs in genetic genealogy opened a brand new door. Detectives teamed up with genetic specialists, uploading the suspect's DNA profile to public ancestral databases. The search returned matches to people sharing DNA with the killer, helping investigators map out family trees. This complex family mapping narrowed the suspect list down to 4 brothers living in Fresno. They zeroed in on Gary Ramirez, who was around 35 years old in 1982. By 2022, Ramirez was living in Maui, Hawaii. Detectives managed to get a DNA sample from one of his children, which strongly matched the crime scene evidence. Working with Hawaiian police, they soon got a direct genetic sample from Ramirez. The test was a perfect match. Ramirez's DNA was all over Karen's clothes and body. His arrest in 2022, 40 years after Karen's murder, brought both relief and deep pain. District Attorney Jeff Rosen pointed out the relentless determination required to solve this. Behind every single cold case file, there is a real person, deep heartbreak, and a mystery. The mystery of Karen's death was finally solved, all thanks to cutting-edge forensic science and a detective who refused to give up. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker spoke about the overwhelming strength of their case. After a thorough investigation, they felt absolutely certain Gary was their man. Rather than risk a trial, Ramirez decided to plead guilty. In 2025, he pleaded no contest to first-degree murder, receiving a life sentence with a chance of parole after 25 years. At 78 years old, Ramirez faced spending his remaining days in a prison cell. As Ramirez sat in a California prison, local investigators celebrated their hard-won breakthrough. Another case would soon prove the unbelievable power of microscopic DNA evidence. Stephanie Isaacson. On the morning of June 1st, 1989, 14-year-old Stephanie left her Las Vegas home, taking a quiet shortcut through an empty dirt lot toward her high school. She never made it to class. Later that afternoon, her body was found in that same vacant lot, her school backpack lying nearby. Medical examiners confirmed that Stephanie had been kidnapped, beaten, and brutally strangled. Las Vegas police launched a massive investigation, thoroughly combing the sandy lot for any clue pointing to her killer. Back in 1989, forensic DNA testing was still in its infancy, requiring massive amounts of biological fluid to yield any results. Investigators carefully collected whatever evidence they could salvage from the dirt lot and from Stephanie's body, but the usable biological evidence left behind was vanishingly small. This case was an uphill battle from day one. The vacant lot was quiet, meaning there were almost no witnesses. Detectives questioned local students who walked that same route, desperately trying to find anyone who saw a suspicious stranger or an out-of-place car that morning. One man who caught the attention of investigators was Darren Roy Marchand. In 1986, 3 years before Stephanie's death, Marchand was arrested for another Las Vegas strangulation. Though those charges were ultimately dismissed, the striking similarity in method raised questions about whether Marchand was connected. But without physical evidence linking him to the scene, detectives could not pursue charges. The case eventually went cold as leads dried up. In 1995, Darren Marchand died by suicide, taking any knowledge of his involvement to the grave. For detectives, Marchand remained a prime suspect, but one they could neither confirm nor eliminate with the existing evidence. The DNA evidence collected in 1989 remained carefully preserved, but the quantity of genetic material was so incredibly small that standard technology could not build a usable profile. The breakthrough came in 2021 when Las Vegas detectives partnered with Othram, a specialized forensic laboratory. The DNA from Stephanie's case measured just 0.12 nanograms. It was an extraordinarily small amount, representing the lowest quantity of DNA ever used to solve a crime in history. Othram's scientists utilized advanced genome sequencing technology. This sophisticated process could extract key genetic details from samples far too small for standard profiling methods. The work was painstaking, requiring highly specialized equipment and deep expertise, but it successfully generated a genetic profile from evidence that every other lab had deemed too degraded to analyze. Once Othram built the profile, detectives turned to genetic genealogy to find their suspect. They uploaded the profile to public genealogy databases, which pointed to individuals who shared genetic markers with the unknown killer. The search led straight to Darren Roy Marchand, confirming what Las Vegas detectives had suspected for decades. The breakthrough brought closure to Stephanie's family. Even though Marchand had been dead for 26 years, her mother released a touching, bittersweet statement. She said, "I am glad they found who murdered my daughter. I never believed the case would be solved. It is good to have some closure, but there is no justice for Stephanie at all." Othram CEO David Mittelman spoke about the weight of the breakthrough, calling it a huge milestone. When you can access information from such a tiny amount of DNA, it opens up opportunities for so many other cases. Since then, this advanced genetic technique has been applied to numerous other cold cases, where evidence was once considered far too degraded for analysis. Another shocking case would show how family trees could unexpectedly blow a case wide open: Melanie Road. In the early morning hours of June 9th, in 1984, 17-year-old Melanie Road left a Bath nightclub and headed home. She never made it. The next morning, a milkman found Melanie's body near some garages close to her home. She had been brutally stabbed 26 times, including 8 chest wounds, and was chased nearly 30 meters during the assault. The pure ferocity of the attack suggested a killer acting in extreme rage to prevent any escape. The Avon and Somerset police launched an immediate, massive investigation. Detectives confirmed she was walking home alone after a night out with friends at the club. Her route took her through familiar, quiet streets that she had walked many times before. That the attack happened so close to her own home made the crime exceptionally terrifying. Forensic teams worked the scene thoroughly, securing critical biological evidence from her body and clothing. The nature of the wounds pointed to a knife or another sharp, lethal weapon, and the sheer number of strikes showed the attack continued long after she was fatally wounded. Autopsy reports detailed critical defensive wounds, proving that Melanie fought desperately against her killer before being overwhelmed. Back in 1984, police followed standard methods, interviewing hundreds of people who were near the area that night. Detectives checked local alibis, compiling potential suspect profiles based on the sheer brutality of the crime. But despite their best efforts, no clear suspect ever emerged. The trail soon went completely cold, leaving detectives with absolutely nowhere left to turn. In 2015, the breakthrough arrived from an unexpected direction. A young woman received a police caution for a minor offense, and standard procedure required swabbing her DNA for the national database. Surprisingly, the system flagged her profile as a close family match to the killer of Melanie Road. This meant she shared enough genetic markers to be a close relative, specifically a daughter. Detectives immediately recognized the immense significance of this match. While the young woman had absolutely nothing to do with the crime, her DNA pointed directly to her father. Police traced her father to Christopher Hampton, who was 32 back in 1984, and living around Bristol. Hampton had no prior history of any serious criminal activity, and absolutely nothing in his past to put him on the police radar during the original investigation. To verify their theory, officers approached Hampton and asked him for a voluntary DNA swab. He cooperated, and the lab analysis confirmed his DNA was an exact match to the crime scene evidence. Trapped by the undeniable scientific proof, Hampton was arrested for murder, and his trial began in 2016. But on the very first day of the trial, Hampton suddenly pleaded guilty, finally admitting to the murder. The prosecution then laid out the brutal details of the assault. The judge condemned the attack as a deeply depraved act, highlighting its sheer, cold-blooded cruelty. At sentencing, Justice Popperwell looked right at Hampton, warning, "You will very likely die in prison." Hampton was sentenced to life behind bars, with a minimum of 22 years before any hope of parole. Since he was 64 years old when sentenced, this massive term meant he would be well into his 80s before ever seeing freedom again. Yet, the most revolutionary case of all involved two separate victims, pioneering a technique that changed forensics forever. This is the story of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. On November 21st, 1983, 15-year-old Linda left her Narborough, Leicestershire home to visit a friend. She never came home. The very next morning, Linda's body was discovered along a secluded path known as the Black Pad. She had been brutally assaulted and strangled. Examiners secured biological evidence from the scene material that would eventually change policing across the globe. The Leicestershire Constabulary launched a massive hunt, but struggled to find a single viable suspect. Because the Black Pad path was so isolated, there were no witnesses, and despite relentless searching, detectives hit a complete wall. The case went cold, leaving her family heartbroken, and a terrified community wondering if a monster walked among them. Nearly 3 years later, on July 31st, 1986, another 15-year-old named Dawn Ashworth vanished while walking home from a friend's house in nearby Enderby. Her body was found 2 days later, assaulted and strangled in a manner eerily similar to Linda's murder. Both victims had attended the very same school, Brockington High School, and their close proximity strongly pointed to a single killer. Forensic experts analysed DNA from both crime scenes, confirming beyond doubt that the same man committed both brutal attacks. But unmasking that killer was proving nearly impossible using standard police methods. In 1986, a 17-year-old local boy with learning difficulties confessed to killing Dawn Ashworth. Yet, he firmly denied any involvement in Linda's murder. At this exact moment, the investigation took a revolutionary turn. Dr. Alec Jeffreys at the University of Leicester had just pioneered DNA profiling, a brand new way to identify people by their unique genetic code. Detectives asked Dr. Jeffreys to run the crime scene evidence against a sample from the teenager who confessed. The resulting analysis proved beyond a shadow of doubt that one man committed both murders. However, that killer was not the teenage boy who had just confessed. His confession was entirely false. The science had stopped an innocent boy from going to prison, while proving the murders were indeed connected. With their suspect cleared but the real killer still loose, Leicestershire police made a historic gamble. They launched the world's very first mass DNA screening, demanding voluntary samples from every male between 17 and 34 across the villages of Narborough, Enderby and Littlethorpe. Roughly 5,000 men came forward to cooperate, provide samples, a massive, unprecedented effort that took months to finish. One of those who should have been tested was Colin Pitchfork, a 27-year-old baker who worked nearby at Hampshire Bakery. But Pitchfork talked a co-worker, Ian Kelly, into taking the test for him under his name. Kelly agreed and handed over a sample under Pitchfork's name, letting the real killer slip right past the dragnet. This lie might have worked forever, but a few months later, he and Kelly made the huge mistake of chatting about what they did with a co-worker at the bakery, and another woman overheard their conversation. A witness overheard the conversation and reported it to the police. Detectives wasted no time arresting both Kelly and Pitchfork. Confronted by police, Pitchfork gave his real DNA, which matched both crime scenes. Under questioning, he confessed to both brutal attacks. He told investigators about Dawn Ashworth, admitting she was simply there, and he capitalized on it in a chillingly opportunistic moment. He crossed paths with both girls completely by chance, striking purely because the opportunity presented itself. In Linda Slatt's case, he actually left his baby son in the car while committing the crime. In January 1988, Colin Pitchfork pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, 2 of assault, and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 30 years, which was later reduced to 28 on appeal. The sentencing judge openly questioned whether a man like Pitchfork should ever walk free again. Pitchfork has tried several times to get released. In October 2025, the parole board rejected his latest bid, ruling he remained a threat. Dawn Ashworth's mother, Barbara, voiced her fierce opposition, saying words failed her, and that the killer would fight to get out no matter what. He took the lives of 2 schoolgirls, she said, insisting they should throw away the key. Colin Pitchfork remains behind bars, his next parole hearing set for 2026. While that case pioneered DNA profiling in the United Kingdom, another investigation would eventually become their oldest solved cold case, Nancy Benelatz. On the night of October 25, 1970, 28-year-old Nancy Marie Benelak was home alone in her Sacramento apartment. She worked as a court reporter and was newly engaged, her entire future bright and full of promise. Her fiancé left around 11:30 that evening, and Nancy went to sleep expecting a normal, quiet night. Instead, an intruder slipped in through her second-story balcony, using tape on his fingertips to avoid leaving any prints. The killer crept into Nancy's bedroom and launched a frenzied attack, stabbing her over 30 times with such force she was nearly decapitated. Nancy fought desperately for her life, leaving defensive wounds on her hands as she tried to fend him off. During the struggle, the killer cut himself, leaving behind a trail of blood in her home. The next day, Nancy's friend and the apartment manager made the horrific discovery of her body. Sacramento Sheriff's deputies rushed to the scene, quickly securing the perimeter of the brutal crime scene. The tape found on the killer's fingers pointed to a planned attack designed to evade police detection. Entering through the balcony suggested the killer had been planning the break-in, and watching Nancy's apartment, detectives carefully collected the killer's blood, keeping it safe as evidence, even though DNA technology was still 15 years away from being used in investigations. Detectives immediately questioned neighbors in the complex, searching for anyone who might have seen suspicious people or odd activity near Nancy's home that night. Investigators discovered a 27-year-old neighbor in the complex named Richard John Davis, whose apartment gave him a direct view right into Nancy's home. But, back in 1970, with no DNA tests or physical proof linking Davis to the crime, police couldn't secure an arrest warrant. The case slowly went cold. Davis remained their prime suspect, but was never officially charged. For decades, Davis lived as a free man, leaving Nancy's family to carry the quiet pain of her unsolved murder. Davis battled severe alcoholism and eventually died in 1997 from drinking-related complications. For over 50 years, the case stood as Sacramento County's oldest unsolved murder. By 2004, advancing DNA technology let forensic scientists pull a genetic profile from blood left in Nancy's apartment. The profile went into the national database, but it yielded no matches to any known offenders. The murder stayed cold, while the genetic evidence sat waiting for future technology to reveal the truth. That breakthrough finally came through forensic genetic genealogy. In 2022, local investigators teamed up with genetic genealogists to upload the killer's DNA profile to public databases. The search hit on relatives of the unknown suspect, allowing team members to build out family trees. The family tree pointed straight to Richard John Davis, the very neighbor first suspected back in 1970. The breakthrough came 25 years after Davis died, meaning he would never stand trial for Nancy's murder. Still, this undeniable proof brought the answers Nancy's family had been desperately seeking for 5 decades. Sacramento County District Attorney Anne-Marie Schubert weighed in on the resolution, saying he clearly intended to do what he did that day. Were he alive, I think we are talking premeditated murder. How close Davis lived to Nancy, combined with how carefully he broke into her home, suggested he had watched her and planned the entire attack. Retired Detective Mickey Lynx, who chased leads for years, was finally recognized for her relentless dedication to finding the truth. Nancy's sister, Linda Cox, penned a letter sharing the family's deep gratitude. After almost 52 years of missing my sister, we owe Mickey Lynx so much gratitude. My husband Tom and I often talked about how Nancy would have loved our ranch, the animals, and the wide open spaces. We missed sharing our children, our grandchildren, and so much more. Yet even that massive time gap would be eclipsed by one final mystery. Margaret Peggy Beck. In August 1963, 16-year-old Margaret Beck, known to everyone as Peggy, traveled to the Flying G Ranch in Colorado to be a Girl Scout camp counselor. Hailing from Edgewater, Colorado, Peggy had a deep love for animals and was incredibly protective of her younger siblings. Her family remembered her as a warm, protective soul who deeply cherished the times they spent together. On the night of August 17th, Peggy went to sleep in her tent at the camp. Since her tent mate was sick in the infirmary, Peggy was left sleeping completely alone. Under the cover of darkness, an intruder slipped inside, assaulted Peggy, and strangled her to death. The horror unfolded in a busy camp packed with counselors and kids, yet nobody saw or heard a single thing out of the ordinary. The next morning, when Peggy missed breakfast, her tent mate walked back from the clinic and made a horrifying discovery. Local sheriff's deputies launched an immediate probe into what seemed like an isolated attack, scouring Peggy's tent and the surrounding woods for any trace of the killer. Technicians took scrapings from beneath Peggy's fingernails, hoping she managed to scratch her killer during the struggle. But back in 1963, DNA testing did not exist, so the collected evidence was tucked away in storage. Detectives questioned every counselor, the entire camp staff, and anyone who had been near the ranch that weekend. Given the remote wilderness of the ranch, her attacker must have worked there, stayed as a guest, or traveled out there with a dark purpose. Investigators chased down every single lead, but a prime suspect never emerged. The trail went cold, leaving Peggy's grieving family in the dark for over 50 years. As DNA testing evolved through the 1980s and 90s, experts analyzed the old fingernail scrapings. By 2007, forensic scientists successfully pulled a DNA profile from those scrapings, uploading a John Doe into the national database. The file sat silent for years, matching no one, while a faceless killer continued to slip away from justice. The murder went unsolved until 2019, when Jefferson County detectives teamed up with genetic genealogy specialists. They refined the DNA and sent it off to United Data Connect, a genealogy lab in Denver. Genetic tracking pointed directly to James Raymond Taylor, marking this as the oldest cold case ever cracked, using DNA genealogy at the time. 56 years after the crime, Taylor was born on December 22, 1939, meaning he was just 23 in August 1963, when Peggy was murdered. Back then, Taylor was a married man working as a TV repairman in the town of Edgewater. Detectives learned he was obsessed with testing ham radios, a hobby that often took him deep into isolated wilderness. This obsession likely led him right to the edge of the Flying G Ranch, yet how he actually crossed paths with Peggy remains a dark mystery. In 2020, police finally issued a murder warrant for James Raymond Taylor, but they faced a massive roadblock. Taylor was completely gone. His last known sighting was way back in Las Vegas in 1976. Had he died during those 44 missing years, or was he still hiding out somewhere? Nobody knew. Sheriff Jeff Schrader made no secret of the department's immense frustration at Taylor's disappearance. He admitted that nothing would bring them more satisfaction than slapping handcuffs on James Taylor. His words echoed a deep desire to finally bring this man to justice, not just to close the case file, but to allow Peggy's family to see her killer face accountability. Investigator Elias Alberti added, "We've spent several months searching for James Taylor, with no luck. We have no idea where he's at. The search for Taylor has involved combing through old death records, chasing down rumors of his whereabouts, and trying to track down relatives who might know where he went. By late 2025, Taylor would be 86, assuming he is still breathing. Peggy Beck's family released a heartbreaking statement, which was read aloud during the press conference. The letter honored Peggy's memory, describing her as a loving, protective soul whose family would cherish her forever. For her surviving relatives, identifying Taylor brought some peace after 57 years, even if his disappearance robbed them of true closure. At the time, it stood as the oldest cold case ever solved using genetic genealogy, though it has since been surpassed by older cases, like the 1956 murders of Patricia Kitsky and Dwayne Bogle, solved in 2021. That is all for today. Thank you for watching, and click here to explore another cold case.